Okay, so you want to own a mobile home park. Rows of trailers, gravel roads, a modest office by the entrance. It sounds like the cheapest, simplest real estate you could buy. Low rent tenants, low maintenance buildings, minimal drama. Buy the dirt, collect the checks, done. Here's the first problem with that picture. You're not buying the trailers. In most parks, the homes belong to the people living in them. They bought the structure, financed it, painted it, planted a garden next to it. What you'd actually own is the ground underneath, the lot, the road that leads to it, the pipes that run beneath it. Your tenants aren't renting a home from you, they're renting a parking spot for one. That distinction sounds small. It isn't. It's the entire business. Because once you're not responsible for the housing stock, your cost structure changes completely. You don't fix leaking roofs or replace water heaters inside 400 individual homes. You maintain the roads those homes sit beside, the water and sewer lines that run under them, the electrical hookups that feed them. The homes age, get repainted, get sold, get replaced, and none of that is your balance sheet. You're not in the housing business. You're in the land business, with housing built on top of it by other people, at their own expense. So what exactly are you charging for, if not the roof over someone's head? You're charging for the one thing they can't easily replace, the spot their home is sitting on. And that's where this stops looking like an ordinary landlord-tenant relationship and starts looking like something else. In a normal rental, if the rent goes up too much, the tenant leaves. They pack a truck, find a new apartment, and the landlord loses a customer. That threat is what keeps most rents in check. A mobile home tenant doesn't have that option, not really. Relocating a manufactured home isn't like moving furniture. It requires a licensed transport company, specialized trailers, road permits, sometimes a police escort for wide loads. And the bill for all of that typically runs from several $1,000s into the tens of thousands, depending on the size of the home and how far it's going. For an older home, it can be worse. Homes built before a 1976 federal safety standard often can't legally be relocated at all in many states. The home isn't just heavy. In a real sense, it's stuck. So imagine you're the tenant. You bought this home for a modest sum, maybe your life savings. The park raises your lot rent. Moving would cost more than the home itself is worth. Staying means paying whatever the new number is. There's a third option. Walk away and lose the home entirely, along with everything you put into it. But for most people living on a fixed income, that's not really an option at all. It's the choice between a bad number and losing the roof over your head, and no rational person picks the second one if they can possibly avoid it. That's the moment the trailer park stops being a punchline and starts being one of the more quietly powerful positions in American real estate. Now ask the next question. If this pricing power is real, why doesn't every investor just go build 100 new parks and cash in? Because they can't. Since the early 1980s, city after city has made it extraordinarily difficult to build a new mobile home park. In one Oklahoma town, a zoning change now requires each new mobile home to sit on at least 2.5 acres, on land where the traditional density was closer to 10 homes per acre. A developer who could once fit close to 30 homes on a parcel is now limited to 2. That isn't a subtle disincentive, it's a mathematical wall. And that pattern repeats itself in one form or another across the country. Some places set minimum lot sizes that make a new park financially impossible. Others simply zone parks out of existence entirely. And others bury the application in a permitting process no developer wants to survive. The reasons vary. Some officials worry about density, some worry about property tax revenue, some just don't want the political fight. But the effect is the same everywhere. The number of parks in the country has barely grown in decades, even as the population of people who need affordable housing keeps climbing. That leaves you holding something rare. Not because you built something extraordinary, but because almost nobody is allowed to build a competitor next door. And once you understand that combination, tenants who can't easily leave and a landlord who can't easily face new competition, you start to understand why serious money has been moving into an asset class that, 20 years ago, institutional investors wouldn't have touched. What used to be almost entirely small, independent, mom-and-pop ownership has been drawing private equity firms, real estate investment trusts, and even pension-backed capital. The share of park purchases going to institutional buyers roughly doubled between the late 2000s and the early 2020s, and dozens of these firms now control well over 1,000 communities between them. Compare that to almost any other kind of real estate an investor might choose instead. Build too many apartment units in a city and rents soften as tenants get options. Build too many self-storage facilities and the same thing happens. But nobody is building too many mobile home parks because almost nobody is allowed to build them at all. To an investor comparing asset classes, a business with rising demand, a tenant base that's economically stuck, and almost no risk of new competition looks less like a trailer park and more like a toll booth. But even a well-placed toll booth only earns money on the road it's actually collecting from. Every lot that sits empty is a lot that generates nothing while still costing something. The road still needs to be plowed. The water line still runs underneath it, pressurized and ready, whether a home is parked there or not. The property tax bill doesn't shrink because a corner of the park is bare gravel. So filling a vacant lot matters in this business in a way that might not be obvious from the outside. A park with plenty of empty spaces isn't just missing some upside, it's actively bleeding the fixed costs of infrastructure it built for a fuller community. That's part of why owners spend money attracting new tenants and financing move-in incentives, even in a market where existing tenants have almost nowhere else to go. The leverage you have over the people already living there doesn't help you with the lot nobody's living on yet. But a toll booth only works as long as the person paying the toll has no other road to take. And once people genuinely have no other road, they tend to notice exactly who's collecting the toll, and they tend to organize. This is where the story stops being a clean investment thesis. Across the country, the pattern after an institutional buyer takes over a park has become familiar enough that it now has a name in local reporting. A family in Washington state watches their lot rent jump from roughly $615 a month to $850 in a single notice. A retired logger in rural Wisconsin sees his rent rise from $350 to $500 after his park changes hands, eating into a fixed disability income that wasn't built to absorb it. These aren't isolated horror stories. They're recurring enough that state attorneys general have opened investigations, and in at least one case, an operator was made to reimburse tenants millions of dollars after regulators found the rent increases hadn't been properly justified. And the tenants in these situations have a specific kind of leverage problem. They can't just leave, as we've established, but leaving isn't the only pressure point. Timing is another one. In some states, if a resident is evicted, they may have as little as 3 weeks to physically remove a home that costs thousands of dollars to move, and in many cases, cannot legally be moved that quickly at all. The clock the law gives you is often shorter than the clock the moving industry needs. So the same mechanism that makes this business attractive to an owner, tenants who are functionally trapped, is exactly what makes it politically radioactive. Lawmakers in at least half a dozen states have introduced bills aimed at capping how fast lot rents can rise. Oregon's legislature, for instance, has pushed to tie future increases to the inflation rate instead of leaving them to whatever the market will bear, a sharp cut from the far higher ceiling landlords had been working under before. Not all of these bills pass. A tenant protection bill in Montana made it all the way to the governor's desk in 2023 and was vetoed on the grounds that capping rent would infringe on landowners' rights. Elsewhere, lawmakers have gone after the increases from a different angle entirely, requiring landlords to actually prove a rent hike is tied to real upkeep and maintenance, rather than simply announcing a new number. But the overall pattern across these different approaches is unmistakable. The more this asset class attracts large capital, the more legislative attention it attracts right behind it. Owning the scarce toll booth doesn't mean nobody's trying to build a new road around you. It means somebody with legislative subpoena power might try to regulate your toll instead. That tension, real pricing power on one side, a growing regulatory response on the other, is the actual economics of this business. Not a guaranteed cash machine, not a moral hazard either, automatically. A genuine ongoing contest over how much of that scarcity value the owner gets to keep. There's a second, quieter tension sitting underneath all of this, and it has to do with what you're actually spending money on as the owner. Because you're not maintaining 400 individual homes, your overhead per unit is lower than a conventional apartment landlord's. But you are responsible for the things that keep the whole community functioning: the roads, the water lines, the sewer system, the electrical grid feeding every lot. Those systems age exactly like any other infrastructure, and in older parks, they're often decades past when they should have been replaced. Some rent increases genuinely are funding overdue pipe and road repairs. Some are not, and tenants and regulators increasingly want proof of the difference, which is exactly what the maintenance justification requirements some states have started writing into law are trying to force into the open. That's a real decision every owner in this business eventually faces. You can let the infrastructure age and pocket more of the rent today, which erodes the long-term value of the property and invites the kind of regulatory scrutiny that can cap your pricing power permanently. Or you can reinvest in the roads and pipes, which costs real money now, but protects both the physical asset and your standing the next time a state legislature starts drafting a bill with your industry in mind. Neither choice is free. One trades short-term cash flow for long-term risk. The other trades long-term risk for short-term cash flow. And because a park's reputation travels fast through the same tenant associations that lobby state houses, the owner who defers maintenance today may find the bill arriving later anyway, not as a repair invoice, but as a rent cap written into state law. And that's also part of why this business hasn't fully institutionalized, despite everything working in a large owner's favor on paper. A meaningful share of the roughly 40 to 50,000 parks across the country are still small, under 50 lots, run by an individual or a family. One theory among people who track this market closely is that a lot of these smaller communities, especially in rural areas, simply haven't been worth an institutional buyer's time yet. Too little scale to justify the deal costs. Too far from the metro markets where population growth keeps lot rents climbing on their own. If that holds, then scale cuts two ways here too. It helps a large owner spread management costs and negotiate cheaper financing, but it also means more scrutiny, more headlines when something goes wrong, and more exposure the moment a state decides to legislate. A lot of small operators aren't avoiding the aggressive playbook out of restraint. They may simply be too small to be worth a lawmaker's attention yet, which is its own kind of protection, even if it's not the kind anyone planned for. So would you actually want to own a mobile home park? The honest answer depends on which version of the business you're buying into. If you're buying scarce land, tenants who can't easily leave, and almost no risk of new competition, and you plan to raise rent as fast as the market allows while deferring the infrastructure bill, you're buying real short-term cash flow and a rapidly growing amount of legal, political, and reputational risk that has already cost some owners millions in reimbursements and lawsuits. If instead you're buying that same scarce land and treating the pricing power as something to use carefully, filling vacant lots instead of just squeezing existing tenants, reinvesting in the pipes and roads that justify the rent you're charging, you're buying a slower, steadier version of the same asset, one built to survive the next round of legislation rather than provoke it. Either way, you were never really buying trailers. You were buying the one thing underneath them that nobody else is allowed to build more of. And discovering, a little too late for some owners, that scarcity cuts in both directions. It makes the land valuable to you, and it makes the person paying you for it impossible to ignore because they aren't going anywhere. That's the part the cheap trailer park fantasy never accounts for. The very asset you bought for its low drama and low overhead turns out to come with a tenant base that has nowhere else to stand, and a growing number of state legislatures who've noticed exactly the same thing you did.